Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 73. Charles and Clint. Charles felt badly for Dr. Banner. It was very obvious the man was incredibly nervous about letting his alter ego out under so-called controlled circumstances for the first time. Oh, he'd managed to bring Hulk forward twice, before now at least. The Harlem incident and, of course, the invasion. But those had been combat situations, and anyone who claimed that combat was controlled anything was lying through their teeth. Dr. Banner's mind was unique in Charles' experience. He could sense Hulk, but only in a very dim, distant, general sort of way. The only thing that came through clearly was a sense of watchful vigilance and violently primal protectiveness that rather reminded Charles of Logan. The difference in what he could sense, once Dr. Banner allowed the change, was rather profound. Charles was rather startled, really. What little anyone knew of Hulk that Charles had been able to discover had always pointed towards him being very primal and primitive at best, animalistic at worst. That turned out to not be the case. Oh, Charles didn't think that Hulk would ever equal Dr. Banner when it came to intelligence, but he was far smarter than anyone had ever given him credit for being. That intelligence was sadly thwarted by ignorance. Hulk didn't seem to know what much of anything was. What little he did know, he seemed to understand instinctively. There was very little he had actively learned. Betty's name, Ross, what storms were, and a handful of other things. But that was it. Everything else that Hulk knew, he just knew. It made sense, given the small amount of time that Hulk had been out and exposed to the world. Hulk is very intelligent, Charles told the Avengers via telepathy. With time, he will be on par with any normal human adult. Certainly not a genius, but intelligent enough to function normally. But currently, his understanding is that of a toddler's. His capacity for speech is at about the same level. I would recommend keeping to very simple, easily understood concepts and words with a maximum of 2 syllables, where possible, for now. Charles kept an eye on things during the introductions, just in case further assistance would be needed. Much to his pleasure, other than a rather close call with Thor, they didn't come close to needing any further assistance from him, and even then, they managed to smooth the situation out without help. He did interject a suggestion once or twice, but that was all. Clint watched people and things, and he saw what other people didn't. It was his thing. A thing born of a life of abuse, when watching his drunk-ass father so he'd know when to run for cover was vital to life and limb. A thing reinforced by his less-than-ideal stint in the circus and his years as a mercenary. Back when the whole Avengers thing had been in the maybe, might be, what if we planning stages, a ton of names had been tossed around as potential members. It had been Clint that had advocated for Hulk's addition to the potential roster. Clint had watched all the tapes of Ross's encounters with Hulk, and he noticed something that was honestly kind of easy to miss, in among all the bellowing and destruction. Back in the early part of his merc days, Clint had stumbled across a mangy, nearly emaciated, half-feral alley mutt that had clearly taken a heck of a beating from someone or something, or multiple someones or somethings. The poor thing had been skin and bones, cut up, lame in one leg, half an ear gone, and the eye on that side badly mangled. The local animal control folks had been there trying to catch the poor thing, and having zero luck with it because, despite its injuries, the dog was alternating between snapping and snarling at everyone who got too close, and running for whatever cover it could find. Eventually, it managed to elude the control folks entirely. Clint, watching from a nearby roof, had been struck by the look of desperation and fear in the mutt's eyes, despite the apparent viciousness it displayed. The mutt hadn't been snapping at everyone because it was vicious, but because it was scared out of its mind. Wanting to try to help the poor mutt, Clint had searched for it for hours before finding it. It had taken the best part of a day and almost half a pizza, all the food he'd had on hand at the time. But eventually the poor thing had let him close. Clint had taken the mutt to the vet, where it had taken an hour or so, and a very level-headed vet, to calm the mutt down enough to get its injuries treated. Once that had been done, Clint brought it to his current place and named the mutt Lucky. He'd fully expected Lucky to tolerate no one but him for any reason whatever, but he'd been fine with that. He'd been wrong. Lucky had turned into an attention whore inside of a month. He spent the next and last 2 years of his life perpetually thrilled that someone wanted to pet him or play with him or just being thrilled with him in general. Clint had joked that the dog would learn to fly at some point with how enthusiastically he wagged his tail all the time. Clint had been heartbroken when the mutt died pretty young. Lucky had been roughly 4, maybe 5 years old when he died. His body giving out before its time thanks to the trauma and damage Lucky had suffered before Clint had rescued him. Clint had seen the same desperation and fear he'd seen in Lucky in Hulk's eyes. He'd noticed that, by and large, it was only ever Ross and his people that had suffered injuries and deaths when Hulk went on a rampage. Oh, there had always been collateral injuries and even deaths, but they'd been collateral. Not the comfort to the victims and their families, but Hulk hadn't meant to hurt or kill them. Actually, the collateral damage that Hulk himself had caused had been fairly minimal, and a key reason Clint had suggested him. Hulk grabbed empty cars or random bits of whatever happened to be nearby to fight with, or got knocked into buildings by rockets or whatever. Hulk never once grabbed people or anything holding people unless those people were soldiers trying to hurt him. That had suggested a greater degree of awareness than most people have been willing to credit Hulk with. Most of the damage done during encounters with Hulk had been thanks to Ross and his goons. Bullets bouncing off Hulk and hitting other people, rockets hitting where Hulk had been and blowing stuff up, that sort of thing. Between those two facts and the fact that, given his druthers, Hulk ran rather than fought, Clint had had a strong suspicion that given half a chance, Hulk would be another Lucky. Pitifully grateful for and thrilled by people who weren't afraid of him and didn't try to hurt him. Phil had agreed with his assessment and had kept Hulk in mind as a possibility. His name had gone on the list after the Culver and Harlem incidents, when it became clear that Hulk was, at least on some limited scale, capable of planning and tactics and startlingly restrained. At least if Betty was involved, either as the apparent to Hulk's eyes target of violence or the one asking Hulk to do something. Which, if it had come to that, they'd have had no problem whatever stealing Betty away from her father if she was willing to be Hulk's handler. Phil at least had no compunctions whatever with making whatever allowances were required in order for an exceptional asset to work with S.H.I.E.L.D. comfortably. And just like when he and Phil had brought Nat in, it wasn't like much of anyone in S.H.I.E.L.D., not even Fury, would be willing to risk Hulk's wrath by messing around with him. Clint loved being right. Oh, Hulk had made plenty of noise when he'd first come out. He'd even knocked everyone over with one of those ground punch things he'd done in Harlem. But he hadn't actually attacked. Interestingly, whatever the deal was with Banner and Hulk and how the transformation worked, it evidently took a few moments for Hulk's brain to boot up fully. Either that or Hulk's vision was for crap, because it had taken about a half a minute and a bit of sniffing before Hulk recognized Tony. The openly pleased look on Hulk's face when recognition hit had made Clint's "yeah!" Yeah, Hulk adored Betty, and he adored Tony, and Clint was willing to bet silent money he'd adore the rest of the team once he understood none of them were out to get him. Clinton had to work to keep from laughing at the exultant look on Hulk's face when he successfully remembered Logan from the fight. Clint still wasn't sure how good Hulk could see, but the sniffing was definitely a thing. It made a weird sort of sense. For Hulk, scent was probably a far more reliable memory trigger than anything else. People remembered scents long after they would forget a name or a face. Scent memory would probably cross over between Banner and Hulk. Again, however that works. A lot easier than words, which Hulk had trouble with, according to Xavier. Visual memories, which might cross over easily as well, would be substantially altered just by the size difference between Banner and Hulk. That shift in perspective would probably make visual memories very confusing for the both of them. It quickly became clear that Hulk was smelling more than the average person did. People with a normal sense of smell didn't smell scared or sad as a thing. Well, unless someone pissed themselves in fear or had been crying, but that was less about smelling the actual emotion and more about adding 2 and 2 and getting 4. So Hulk's sense of smell was closer to an animal's than a human's. Also, when they got Hulk to that point, Clint so wanted to play poker with him. Hulk had no concept of a poker face. Literally everything he was thinking and feeling was writ large on his face. Mostly it was a childish curiosity and glee mixed with a touch of suspicion and amusement. Other emotions flashed across that broad-featured face with no attempt whatever by Hulk to hide them. Possibly because Hulk didn't know people could read what he was feeling by the look on his face. It wasn't like he'd been around people who were willing to interact peacefully enough to have learned that little factoid. Clint had been a bit surprised when Hulk focused on him after Clint had mentioned the smell thing. He'd figured, what the hell, and introduced himself. He'd parked himself next to the big guy during the rest of the introductions, earning himself a baffled look from Hulk. More than once, he and Tony had shared looks. Tony alternated between looking like he nearly wanted to go kick Ross's face in and a mad sort of glee that Hulk was so peaceable. Clint didn't blame him on either front. Hulk was definitely a Lucky, and Clint had felt the same damn way over Lucky, and was feeling that way over Hulk. Any doubts they'd had about his sense of smell went the way of the dodo once Hulk was introduced to Loki. Hulk knew pretty much instantly there was something screwy going on there, and if the look on his face had been anything to go by, he didn't much like it. But he'd calm down easily enough. Of course, Hulk wasn't completely like Lucky, in that he was, 12 feet tall and insanely strong. It had a temper on him. Things went a little sideways for a minute or two when Hulk was introduced to Thor. Hulk made it very clear he did not approve of the whole thunder and lightning shtick. That said, Hulk still didn't go on the attack. He threw a bit of a tantrum. Clint decided to do something. Tony'd not been having much of a problem talking Hulk out of getting violent, but none of them had been touching Hulk much. Not because they were scared to, but because they were being cautious. Hulk didn't have much experience with touch being a good thing, and nobody wanted to accidentally set him off. Thing was, if Hulk held true to form, he wouldn't want to risk hurting someone he liked or that was nice to him. It explained why Hulk seemed to have settled for doing something that made people lose their balance, rather than attacking anyone directly when his temper got the better of him. So if someone was in physical contact with him, Hulk might stop even the punching the ground thing. Besides, Clint didn't like hanging around on the ground when there were other options. So he clambered up onto Hulk's shoulder. He earned himself a lot of "Are you out of your alleged mind?" looks from pretty much everyone except for Nat, who just looked resigned. Hulk himself was just confused. Clint took advantage of his proximity and started petting Hulk's hair. He had no idea if that would keep Hulk calm, but it was worth a shot and would hopefully start getting Hulk used to being touched without malice. Clint did not envy Thanos and his army when they got here. By then, Hulk ought to have gotten really attached to and protective of the team. And if Hulk reacted to threats of violence against the team the way he did to threats of violence against Betty, yeah, that wasn't gonna end well for Thanos. Not at all. They opted to not do any actual training this first time. Hulk seemed to understand well enough, but Steve decided to err on the side of caution and give Hulk a bit more time to get to know the team before throwing training into the mix. Instead, they spent about an hour working on Hulk's understanding of the world and vocabulary. Hulk had been hesitant at first, but once he realized they were in earnest, he'd actually started asking questions. Given his limited vocabulary, they surprisingly didn't have to play guess what he means, even once. Hulk was pretty good at compensating for his lack of words. Yet another indication there was more going on in that big green head than most folks had credited him with. Clint was pretty sure the entire team wanted to punch Ross in the face when they realized Hulk didn't even know the word for tree, or worse, gun. The poor guy had been getting shot at for the better part of a decade and didn't even know what it was other than that it stung when it hit him. At the same time, it was fascinating as hell to hear just how much of Bruce's vocabulary transferred to Hulk. Words like flying and puny, and so on. Things Hulk had no reason to know, but did. When Hulk started to lose interest, Steve had the skiffs land nearby but out of sight, and Betty came over. None of them were quite sure how to get Hulk to revert to Bruce when Hulk wasn't tired, but Betty had indicated that Hulk could and would revert pretty fast when she was around. Clint, wisely, had hopped down off of Hulk's shoulder as soon as Steve mentioned the skiff's landing. If Hulk had a tail, he'd have gone airborne for sure when he realized Betty was there, which, interestingly, he smelled her before she was visible through the trees. The moment he did, the team, even Tony, ceased to exist entirely as far as Hulk was concerned. He bounded, literally, one big jump over to Betty when she became visible, grinning hugely. Betty! Hulk picked Betty right up and cuddled her close, an ecstatic look on his face. The big guy damn well started purring, or making a noise that came as close to a purr as made... Oh, never mind. Betty had just enough time to give Hulk a hug around the neck before he shrank back down to Bruce. Okay, that was officially illegally cute, just so you know. Tony piped up. Brucey, I am hurt. I thought I was your favorite. Bruce looked a little groggy and confused, but he rallied enough to answer Tony. Sorry, Tony. You're only second best. Tony pounded theatrically, making several of the team, including Clint, laugh.